Hello, and thank you for joining us in this volleycast. And today is something I'm quite interested in. I'm looking forward to where this conversation goes. We have Jen Vranes, who's the founder of the blog motheronthetower.com, and she's been exploring from her own personal healing journey the issue of Lyme disease and some of the things which contribute to that, things like vaccine injury, and of course the ever-present important topic of nutrition and things like that. So, what we're gonna do in our conversation, I think this will be very fertile, is we'll take Jen's personal experiences, what she's been exploring, and her story, what she's doing with her blog, things like that, and interweave it with my clinical experience and the principles of Heilkunst Medicine, so we can start to really develop a much more expansive picture of what we actually need and want to think about in the treatment and cure of Lyme disease and other similar things as well. So why don't Jen, why don't you start with that? Why don't you kind of give us a little bit of how you came to start your blog, and you know link that, of course, to your personal story, what you've been exploring, and sort of what the beginning and the ongoing process has been of your journey, and how you're reflecting that in your blog.
Thank you, Dr. Cornteyer. I look forward to our conversation today, and I'm excited to talk about this topic. I've been amazed at how much I've learned since I began blogging about strengthening the immune system naturally, and also some of the dangers and risks associated with vaccinations. I began looking into this back when I was pregnant with my first child. And at the time, I felt impressed to consider how I took care of my body for her health during the pregnancy, and also how best to take care of her as a baby. So I began open-minded and looking at two different sides. The first thought that came to mind was to look into birth rates and which countries had the best birth rates. And I found that Europe and Scandinavia had beautiful scenarios for when the women would give birth, a very loving, peaceful environment. It was very healthy for the mother. Their methods for taking care of the baby after birth were different than what we were doing in the US. And the European and Scandinavian statistics were much better than ours. So we didn't have the internet back then. And so I was reading a lot of books. And then I thought, okay, I have picked out a pediatrician. I need to talk to him and get his view on this matter. And we sat down and talked, and I hold this doctor in such high regard for being so open and honest with me. And he told me that he would understand if I didn't vaccinate my baby, because he had just recently vaccinated a boy in his practice, and that boy got polio because of the vaccination. And that really opened my eyes to how risky and dangerous vaccinations can be, and that they're not all safe and effective and the greater good. So that's where my feelings and thoughts were back then. And then I began the blog when I noticed there was a lot of indoctrination going on in colleges, and in speaking with different people over the years about vaccines, I noticed a lot of people would put up a wall, seemed kind of quick to judge, and not very polite in conversations in reference to the topic. And I thought, a lot of people need to have more details on this. And one way I can do this is through a blog. So I began the blog, and I was really surprised at the immensity of the vaccine injuries and deaths. And the average person walking down the street wouldn't know that over $5 billion has been paid out of courtrooms for people that have been vaccine injured or that have lost a child from a vaccine. And it's been proven in court that it was tied to the vaccine. I think most people don't know that. And I also had concern for my own family, my own you just care immensely for your family, and you don't want to see any of them put at that kind of risk. And you also know that the parents and the grandparents immensely love their children and grandchildren, and you would hate for them to have the pain of a grandchild or child becoming vaccine injured or dying from a vaccine. And so that was one side of things that I knew I wanted to cover. And when you choose not to vaccinate, you need to also learn methods to help strengthen the immune system. And so I've had a lot of study over the years on ways to strengthen and heal the body through natural methods. This, just to tie in to Lyme really quick here, I became sick with Lyme over 20 years ago and didn't receive a diagnosis for over 20 years due to like negative blood tests and pretty much negative blood tests because the symptoms were lining up with Lyme. And it was a while before I even learned that blood tests couldn't be accurate. So, and then eventually I found the right lab, a more lab with better reputation, and it found all the Lyme. But because I was sick that long with Lyme, I didn't have antibiotics to kill the Lyme disease bacteria. And I had to learn ways to maintain my health through diet and herbs. And I've done a lot of study into how our emotions can affect our health. And so I've done a lot of work with like energy work and clearing fixed emotions, and that has been surprising at how helpful that is and how much peace and calm and encouragement for life you receive after those kind of sessions. It's been a very fascinating path. There's always something new somebody is finding. A new combination of herbs, maybe in the form of an essential oil or a tincture. It could be a new homeopathic remedy. And we're just so fortunate in this day and age to have all the knowledge from the medical field, and then also have all the knowledge from an alternative natural health form of health, and to be able to combine the two when you need to. When I did receive the Lyme diagnosis, I went on antibiotics for about 3 months, and it helped immensely. I also found that using methylene blue has been incredibly helpful for me. And everybody has a different combination of what works well for them. We're all different. We all have different makeups. And way back when I had a serious trauma, and very shortly after that, I'd become very, very sick. And I never saw the tick. I never saw the rash. But it's very possible that I just didn't see it. And I was completely overwhelmed. I was a single mom with 2 young children and constantly having to fight a war with an ex-husband who just loved to war and war and war. And I just wanted a peaceful, loving environment for my children. And I noticed that very quickly my life was deteriorating, my health, and just becoming more tired. And at the time, I didn't know I had Lyme disease. I didn't even know I had something serious like that. Just thought, oh, I've been working so hard for so many years. It must be catching up with me. And there were certain things I didn't even see back then that I can look back and see now. And, I needed to make the meals and make a living and make sure my children had everything they needed. And I just felt things just deteriorating and I didn't know what to do. And at the time, the thought came prayer, which is something that has worked very well for me throughout my life. And so I had a very serious prayer. And what I was guided to was to use the atonement of Jesus Christ and apply the healing of the atonement to every area of my life that needed it. So if I was struggling with, so I would, in prayer, reference and request that the healing powers of the atonement would be applied to, say, fatigue. And it usually wouldn't be too long before an idea would come to mind of maybe something to look up or a person to ask or a physician to see. Sometimes it was somebody else coming to me and just randomly sharing something that is exactly what I needed to hear on the path I was on. And I just applied that technique to all different areas. And, because it's the spiritual, physical, emotional, mental, it all comes together. It's all intertwined. And so I can see the blessing of not having an answer that it was Lyme 20 plus years ago, and to learn how to maintain my health until I received a diagnosis. And it's been surprising to me how I have needed allopathic medicine as well as the natural medicine. The two combined are what I've needed in my healing path. I couldn't have done it one without the other. And I'm surprised at what a huge world exists on natural health and how many options there are. And, we're all different. We all have different makeups, and what works for one person might not work for another. And I think for me, just putting the Lord at the helm and prayer has helped guide me to what methods work best. And I'm still learning every day. When I started the blog, I did this deep dive, and it continued for many, many years into material. There was so much news and material that you would not find on mainstream news. And my understanding is that pharma gives such a high percentage of advertising dollars that if a newscaster brings up the risks of vaccines, then they're called into an office the next day and their job is on the line. Doesn't really sound like that's in the best interest of our children's health or anybody else. So you really have to find this information elsewhere, but there is a mountain of information out there. And I was shocked at the information I was reading on this one particular website that catalogs Gardasil and Cervarix vaccine injuries. And Cervarix is the European form of Gardasil. And to see these healthy, vibrant children, sometimes overnight, usually not very long, number of days, and there's just their life is stolen from them. And there's very little help that they receive from the medical side of things. And so these families have gone on a search, and I just can't imagine the heartache and the expenses that these families go through. And they end up finding a doctor that will go out on a limb and help them with what they need. And they're not thinking about what society might be saying. And it's a lot of beautiful stories of doctors that are just with these patients every step of the way. And I came across your clinic, um, being that you and your wife are so um, expert and experienced in treating symptoms of autism. And I want to learn more about this. And I, I'm just excited with all of the new information that keeps surfacing and the options that exist for people. Um, when I was studying at Future Doctors, I just came across these doctors in different parts of the world because people were injured in different parts of the world from vaccines. And I found this common thread that overwhelmingly these physicians understood to do no harm, first and foremost, and just salt of the earth healthcare practitioners. And I wanted their stories to be heard. I wanted people to know the goodness and the investment they were making in other people's health. And I'm, still finding more doctors like this, and many that I'll be featuring this next year. And um, I wanted my audience to hear more about what you are and your wife are, the difference you are making in your clinic, and to get that word out. Um, you have made a significant difference in helping children with autism to raise their quality of life. And I think that's important to share.
Hey, thanks so much, Jen. That's I really love hearing your story. Now, I had a general idea of where you're coming from, from your what's on your blog and just some of our email conversation and things like that. But no, this I love it so much. And at one level, it's so closely similar to a lot of our patients' stories, right? Like over the years, like it's like what's that old saying, a broken record. But that's kind of the wrong expression, because I don't mean I'm bored. I just mean, yeah, we hear these same types of health journeys and self discoveries and the kind of research that people do for themselves and for their children, and all these kinds of things, and the same types of experiences, the same themes, just kind of recycle year over year over year. And there's reasons for that, right? Like you've alluded to a lot of this, like some of the, a lot of what people don't know about, vaccine injury and, some of the statistics about all of that. Yeah, the need for education is really high. So, like blogs like yours are so important. But yeah, so that's just my general impression. But I wanted to get into some detail here, and what was interesting to me as well, like you were talking about three general areas of health. You were talking about the vaccinations, you were talking about Lyme disease, and then finally you were talking about autism. So each one of those on their own deserves a whole long discussion. There's a lot to talk about each of those. We're not gonna do an encyclopedia of each of those three things, but I do want to talk more at a bigger kind of a level of philosophical principles of treatment and of healthcare. I think that's where we really get a lot of mileage in terms of helping people to understand the bigger picture and what kind of things we need to be focused on, and how we kind of go through the actual healing of some of these deep health issues, which the Western medical system has quite a poor track record. Of course, we do need them for emergency medicine, and certain testing certain things that you can say they do with great specialization. But the broader issue of how do you really get to the bottom of chronic illness, that's not their specialty. So yeah, you said it in so many words. Yeah, there are things we can get from both sides, but we need to be super clear about the map of how we put all that together, because for most people, they kind of run around trying this, trying that, going to this doctor, going to this naturopath. It's like, what's that old expression about a chicken running around with their head cut off? It's like there's no guidance, like there's no guiding system, other than what you were saying in your story. Of course, we love our children, we love ourselves, we want to be better. We want to find the best health we can. So that's motivating us. But we don't have a map. So it's like going on a long journey without a map. Like, it's not going to go very well, right? So anyways, I just pulling out some of the elements of your story. Um, as I say, we have these three areas you were touching on, and your story with them: the vaccine injury, the Lyme, and the autism. But yeah, rather than doing an encyclopedia of each of those three things, I think we can do something very useful as far as laying out this broader conceptual map or philosophical map of what do we actually need to be thinking about and orienting ourselves around the process of healthcare. And with all of those three things, your three topics, and everything else really in healthcare, kind of they all root down to three core questions, or I won't even say questions, let's say three organizing principles about how we think of all the different things that go into the complexity of health, right? Because yeah, health is complex for sure, but as I'm saying, there are three master orienting principles which give us the map that I'm talking about. So the three principles that are behind every process of a successful healthcare program come down to these three things. So number one is the principle of therapeutic regimen. Regimen. This is the area that most people know a lot about. Some people do a lot about it, and it's everything to do with diet and lifestyle and detox, and getting good sleep and drinking fresh water, clean water, fresh food, organic food. Like, we can talk for days and months and years just about this area, and it's necessary, right? Of course, there's so much misinformation and confusion and contradictions, and people say, oh, well, should I eat this, or is it better to do that? And all these kinds of questions. Of course, the details, you'll spend your whole life kind of mastering the optimal regimen, the optimal diet, the optimal lifestyle for yourself, because we are all individual. There are principles that apply to all of us, but within the principles, we have to also find our individuality. So that's number one, the regimen. Let's say we can talk about that for decades, getting to all the details. But yeah, just to start to really give shape to our map here, we start with regimen, and then area number two is what's called therapeutic medicine. Now, in our case, I'm using the word medicine specifically to refer to homeopathic medicine. Now, I'm not talking about pharmaceutical medicine, I'm talking about the homeopathic medicine. So, where the first area was regimen, what we're dealing with there is the general imperative that we have to follow of balancing ourselves at all different levels. Balanced diet, balanced kind of mental structure to our life. We don't want to be overstimulated or understimulated, things like that. Exercise, like we don't want to over exercise, which people do, or under exercise, which people also do. But yeah, we're all working on the principle of balance, right? Getting enough, just the right amount of everything. But now when we're in the second area, we're in a totally different principle. It's not the principle of imbalance anymore. And I'm saying that's so important because I've seen this time and time and time again. people get onto the principle of balance, but then they get stuck there. They don't move to the next principle, which we're going to talk about this in a moment. The principle of the second principle of healthcare, and then the third principle. But most everyone, just stays on that first principle of balance. Let's say it's the right principle for diet and all these things, but it's the wrong principle as you go up the map, as I'm talking about. So it's, like anything in life, what's good in one context becomes harmful in another context. So that's really important. So we're moving into this second area. We're not in the realm of imbalance anymore. So you can't like, we're in the area when we have functional issues, diseases, other things we can talk about, shocks and traumas, where you cannot solve those problems by balancing yourself. You can't exercise your way out of it. You can't eat healthy to get out of it. You can't do a detox to get. It's like all the principles from the first area, they have to fall away now. They're not going to work anymore. In fact, they're going to cause more harm. And I've seen that so many times. But so in this second area, we're not dealing with balance, but we're dealing with, as I said, the homeopathic remedies. And homeopathy is based on the clear, simple principle of the law of similars, or like cures like. So I don't know if you've had experience using homeopathic remedies. If so, I'd like to expand our conversation into that. I think that might be quite interesting. But just the general principle here, now we're in the law of similars. So where you're applying specific homeopathic remedies that, at the bioenergetic level, really match the state of disease or the state of dysfunction that the person is suffering from. So again, we could spend a long time going into details of that. I just want to give the bigger map here to start out with. And so, yeah, using those homeopathic remedies, as I said, we're not trying to correct the problems of imbalance. That has to be handled at the other level, the diet and everything. The homeopathic remedies, they're curing specific diseases, they're curing specific functional issues, balancing certain, let's say, hormonal functions, whatever it is, at all these different categories. But we're using a totally different principle now. So yeah, we have the first principle of balance, the second principle of homeopathic medicine, the law of similars, and then finally we come into the third area, where the first one was called therapeutic regimen, second area therapeutic medicine. The third area is called therapeutic education. Now, what does that mean? I mean, it's a plain enough word, but let's get a little more specific in healthcare. This and same thing. So now the issue, you're trying to correct an imbalance, that doesn't apply anymore. In fact, that's going to cause more harm. The homeopathic remedy, the law of similars, that's not going to work anymore. That will also cause more harm. We need to use the correct principle in this third area. So the problem of this third area, and there's different language we could use, different words we can use, but the main way to get at the problem here is, one way of saying it, we're dealing with what some people call kind of psychosomatic disease, or mind body interference. Like, let's say somebody has a certain kind of belief about themselves, that causes stress and causes them to perceive their life in a certain way, itself can be the cause of illness, and and that has to be treated by the principle in this third jurisdiction. So another way of saying all of this about this area is, where the first area we're dealing with imbalance, the second area we're dealing with disease, but now in this third area we're dealing with, let's say, with illusions or delusions. Like I said a second ago, people have kind of certain distorted beliefs about themselves, or how they fit into the world, or things like that, and those mental states on their own over time can create different patterns of illness. So now the therapeutic principle here, if we're dealing with illusions and delusions, well, now we're in the realm of really confronting the challenge of really being able to open ourselves up instead of, where we're in an illusion. We need to open ourselves up and confront the truth. Now, I have to say that in a very general way, because we have to get into the specific details for each person. But like I said earlier, use the principle of rebalancing, like in the first jurisdiction. You can't use the homeopathic remedies, but now you're dealing more, well, either you can say through talking, right? You have a discussion, you can kind of help somebody illuminate where they're kind of going off track between the illusions versus truth. Or it can be at the somatic level, the body level, certain kinds of body therapies, like certain kinds of trigger release therapies, and you can really get into releasing where those illusions have kind of been buried into the cellular memory of the body. So again, a very, very big area. I'm just giving a little bit of an indication here, but this now, between these three areas, now we can take anybody, whether we're dealing with the vaccine injury, whether we're dealing with Lyme disease, whether we're dealing with autism, or really just about anything else. Those three areas are the clear, logical map of how you find your way through healthcare. Because as I said earlier, people are running around like a chicken with their head cut off, or as I also said, going on a long journey without a map. It's like maybe an adventure for some people, but it would be very disturbing for a lot of people, like getting lost and not getting to where you're trying to go. So, anyways, with those three principles, I think we can really kind of expand on a lot of what you brought in your own personal experience, start to plug the details in. And as I said a few moments ago, Jen, I'd be really interested to know if you yourself have had any personal experience taking homeopathic remedies, and if so, more specifically, there's kind of a pretty generic way, that a lot of people have been introduced to homeopathy, but that's very different from the way we use the remedies in our bigger Heilkunst model. So, if you've had experience with the remedies, was it kind of the more general, the mainstream homeopathy, or was it more in the Heilkunst mode? So, I'll leave you to that specific question, but also to kind of unfold a little bit more of your story, given what we're talking about with this map of three jurisdictions.
How do you get to the bottom of chronic illness? What a good question. That question is gaining a lot of attention in 2025 for good reason. Dr. Corentere, I'm looking forward to continuing our discussion today. The question I would like to begin with is your philosophical treatment of healthcare found through the philosophical mapping. I like your suggestion to break some of these ideas down. So, in discussing the three organizing principles, the first one, as you shared, is therapeutic regimen. A general balanced diet, sleep, nutrition, mental health, and so forth. Just like a lot of people, I feel like I've spent a lot of my life searching for the best ways to apply these different methods. And a lot of time and effort, just like many people. The three organizing principles, I think this one in our culture is top heavy. An immense amount of money and effort is put into this area. And I bet all of us would see better results with balancing the three principles. So next we have is your second principle, therapeutic medicine or homeopathic medicine. To start, I was hoping if you would share more about the law of similars. I'd like to understand that, and my audience to be able to understand that a little bit better. I have applied mainstream homeopathy at times, but I could use definitely added training in it. My first introduction to homeopathy followed a condition that I had immediately upon sitting up from an epidural with my first child. I had this horrible headache, and it continued every single time I sat up for 4 months. A friend introduced me to a homeopathic detox. And so this was the first time I had ever tried anything homeopathic. And as I used the bottle of the detox, it improved. And by the time I was done with the bottle, the headaches were gone. And it was a very unique type of headache. And I never experienced that headache again. Another time, when we came across homeopathy was when I was taking my new child to the park. She was a toddler, and there was a small group of us moms with our kids. And my daughter had fallen from the playground equipment and had a pretty bad fall. And one of the moms immediately rushed over with this kit, and she said it was her homeopathic emergency kit. I had never seen anything like that before, but I thought it was great that she had something like that. And inside were these little tubes with little tiny melt away pellets in them for the different homeopathic remedies. And she shared with me Arnica montana, which she used for injury. So I had my child take whatever the required number of pellets was. I think it may have been 3. And they just dissolved under her mouth. They don't taste bad or anything like that. And in a very short time, she became calm. And you could see reduced swelling from her injury in a short amount of time. And then for myself, most not recently, I guess, but I really liked using the homeopathic rescue remedies. And I became familiar with that when I was a single mom, and there were just really high stress times during that period. And I just would carry this little tin around with me. I always wanted to have it on my person. It was just a quick go-to. It was just a godsend, and it would help with, high stress or negative emotions. And so that was something that I like to use. And on your next organizing principle, a therapeutic education, I really feel like this area is starting to open up, and word is getting around on how well it works. It seems like has got to be so expansive. And it's psychosomatic disease. And that word, I think, has been really misunderstood for a time now. I wanted to read the definition on this, being that it's so misconstrued and viewed as an illness being in your head. I mean, how many times have people heard that? Well, it's just in your head. I mean, who wants to hear that when they're sick and miserable? The definition is a psychosomatic disorder is a physical. Oh no, did this end? Oh no, it's still going this way. A psychosomatic disorder is a physical illness that is believed to be caused or worsened by psychological factors such as stress, anxiety, or trauma. It involves the interaction between the mind and body where emotional distress can impact physical health. Well, yes, but I think our society is kind of not quite understanding exactly what it means. I think a lot of doctors have the cop out all too often that it's in your head, or, you know, looks like there's a need to up our game and see how the physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual all interact. I think for this to happen, we need to work hand in hand with allopathic medicine and alternative. They need to be balanced. And quite frankly, I think insurance should be covering the alternative as well. So you were saying that the therapeutic education is to break down the belief about oneself, and that could be the cause of the illness. It just makes sense that we can make ourselves sick through a recurring negative thought. It can be easy to get caught up in emotion at times. We know that our thoughts can make chemical changes in our body. Medications can cover a symptom, which can be very useful. But let's also get to the core bottom line issues of what is causing the symptoms. I can work so hard at times on diet and nutrition and to be completely sabotaged by emotion that overwhelmingly drives me to chocolate or to eat a little too much at a fun gathering. Um, I just don't feel content in those moments until I feed that emotional trigger to try to pacify it. And I think a lot of people experience that probably in yo-yo dieting, just in part due to an unresolved emotional trigger. And the good news is we can muscle test this. We can get to the bottom of what is causing different issues. An example I would share is I had this odd symptom, and my tongue was stinging just out of the blue, just stinging. And it had gone on for a number of days and it didn't go away, and I didn't know how to get rid of it. And it was very annoying and distracting. And I thought, am I having an allergy to something? And and then the thought came to mind to go to my integrative chiropractor and muscle test it. And and so I did. I made an appointment and addressed some other things as well. And when he muscle tested that, there was an immediate memory that came forward. And it was of a close, extended family member that had been dishonest recently with my husband and I. And there were hurt feelings. And as soon as he released that stuck emotion, the stinging was gone, never came back. So when my integrative chiropractor muscle tested, he muscle tested to know if the root cause was physically related, spiritually related, mentally related, or emotionally related. And it came back with a positive result for emotional. And when he released the fixed emotion, I had this memory come forward that I mentioned, and there were just words inside that I didn't know how to formulate, and I was hurt, and my husband was hurt, and this extended family member, we love them so much, and we just, it was just a little bit of a shocking situation. And once the emotion released, I was able to, in a much more loving, calm, peaceful manner, know the words I needed to address the situation and to put the proper boundaries in place. It's kind of funny because the stinging tongue, as soon as that emotion was released, the stinging tongue immediately stopped, and I have never had it since, and it's been a number of years. For me personally in health, I really like combining intellect with prayer. And, people can pray multiple times a day. For me, I like to do a prayer in my heart a lot. And in fact, muscle testing is a form of prayer for me. I muscle test and pray to my Heavenly Father to help guide me when I muscle test. And I like taking the knowledge that I have and prayer and letting that guide me. And it's kind of funny. I'll even muscle test just through prayer when I'm in a restaurant reading a menu. I mean, it really comes in handy in different places. I feel like your mapping program, it sounds like it really organizes health and healing. And I would love to hear more about that. And I know my audience would love to hear more about that. Um, I hadn't heard of Heilkunst before becoming familiar with your Arcanum clinic, and I would love to know more about their regimen. I wish I could just walk into your Ottawa Arcanum clinic and visit with you and Allison and your talented staff. But you guys are quite a ways from where I'm at, but I'm glad that you have a program in place for telemedicine. I do understand that you run a clinic in Mexico as well. I'd love to know which clinics are best for people with different ailments. Um, I I look forward to hearing more about what we've been discussing today. And this really feels like we're getting back to the basics, and truly the full embodiment of the body in a professionally guided way. Um, Thank you, Dr. Corintair, for your time today, and I hope we can continue discussing topics well into the future. Thank you.
Hey, Jen, thank you so much. I love your examples. This is your life story, of course, but yeah, these are very real and very concrete. And we can't really do anything without the examples of real life and real life people. Otherwise, all we have is just theory floating way up here. It may be interesting, but it doesn't really do much. So yeah, as I say, I really love the examples, some of the directions you're going here. I'm going to pick up, I think, on where there's a little bit more of an emphasis in your questions and your thought process, and that is, to go even more specifically into the second jurisdiction, the homeopathic law of similars, like here's like. And I think actually a good way to really start that, to kind of give that concept is in comparison with the first jurisdiction, the therapeutic regimen, or all of diet and lifestyle and issues of imbalance, right? I gave this as in part of my big overview in a previous part of our discussion, but yeah, I think you're really zeroing in on something important here. And the first thing we would really start with is, what's the difference between the first and the second jurisdiction? The first jurisdiction is all about the question of balance. And this doesn't really need me to really give much definition here. Everyone really gets this. Yeah, you said so yourself, in so many words, but the idea of whether somebody's diet is out of balance or their lifestyle is out of balance, their people even this is even a common phrase. People talk about work-life balance, like balance, balance, balance. It's everywhere. We understand it. It's clear. But as I say, we do need the further distinction where we can't take the principle of balance into the second and third jurisdictions. That's where we start to actually create more problems. But yeah, to really be clear, so we don't need more definition there, but we have a whole area of that first jurisdiction is all about balance. And why I'm starting there is to kind of give us a little launch pad to, well, now how do we define the second jurisdiction? Are we just dealing with a more complicated imbalance? No, the second jurisdiction is not an imbalance. As you can't correct it the same way you correct a nutritional imbalance. Like, when let's take the basic example, somebody has a vitamin C deficiency, their innate healing power, they don't have to go read a textbook about vitamin C. Their body just starts to crave the foods that have vitamin C, oranges and other fruits, and some of the vegetables and everything else. And actually, I had a patient this week, a child whose mother was saying, "Oh, like lately he's just crazy about oranges. He just eats several oranges a day," and just kind of cute. Think of a child just gobbling up all the oranges, but no, this is our natural healing power, our instinctual level. Our body just knows what to do. You watch animals as well. They just they pick and choose. Do they go and eat from this bush over here or this patch of grass? Or yeah, there's again, obviously they're not reading a textbook on nutrition, their instinctual wisdom is just driving them to what they need to stay in balance. So that's, as I say, that's kind of built right in. But where we do need our rational intellect is now when we start going up to the second jurisdiction. So now we're not in the realm of balance and imbalance anymore. Now we're dealing with actual disease. Now, I do need to be much more clear about defining that. We all know what an imbalance is, but disease is a word that gets misused all the time, and so people are really, really, really confused. Like I'm using the word now. I guarantee almost everybody who's listening will misunderstand that word disease. It just gets all muddy in the mind. And is it, again, is it just a special form of imbalance? No, it's not that. What a disease is, and obviously I'm speaking from Hahnemann's way of thinking. He defined this very clearly. It's it's really kind of a specific disturbance to our deeper life functions. Okay, so like an imbalance, of course, disturbs us, but not the way I'm talking about here. Like that's just something's missing, something's out of whack, and you can just correct. Just like my hands are doing, you can just make the seesaw go back to the middle instead of being way out of balance. But that's not what a disease is. It's something much more profound. Has basically caused a damage to our life force. Okay, and let's give maybe an example or two here. Like a little more vivid. We've all had some experience like this, either an emotional shock, a very strong emotional shock, or a physical trauma, like an emotional shock. Let's say, some, well, the classic situation we all go through this sooner or later of a great loss. You lose a family member or a friend or a pet or what have you, and that's just life in one sense. But in terms of our experience of it, depending on what that relationship was, that can be a very strong, damaging impact on that deeper functioning of our life force. So it makes no sense to talk about that as an imbalance. You can't just, like, let's say you lost a pet, let's say a dog or a cat or something, and you can't call that an imbalance. It's like, oh, well, now I have a deficiency of, that specific pet, Rover the dog. I now have a Rover deficiency. Well, no, nobody talks that way because there's nothing real about that. We talk about the damage to our emotional body. I'm hurt. I'm sad. I'm just, I'm missing this pet. I have feelings of loss. It's like, this is a deep experience in our life force, which you can't correct the same way you correct a vitamin C imbalance. It's like two totally different things. So we define them differently because they are different. We treat them differently because they are different. So all of this to say, I'm giving this definition of disease as different from imbalance, but really to get to the heart of your question, Jen, is to talk a little bit more about the law of similars, the homeopathic principle. And this is where we give a very specific homeopathic remedy, as I just did a moment ago, defined disease as an actual damage to our life force. This, it's kind of counterintuitive at first, but it makes sense. The more you meditate on the idea, the more you experience in real life. The homeopathic remedy based on the law of similars is actually directly repairing what got damaged in the life force. Now, of course, you can't bring back, a dead person or a dead pet or anything like that. That's life. We're here and then we're not. We're mortal. There is death, there is loss. Like, those are the facts of life. But what we're doing with the remedies is, as I just said, repairing the damage to our life force so that we can continue to function in our optimal way. Our full, like all the full capacities of our life force, without being perpetually dragged down by this damage that happened. Now, you will always remember that person or that pet that you lost. That will always be part of your memory and your life and your whole emotion and your personality. That's always part of you. But what we're concerned about from a medical point of view here is repairing that damage, because left left untreated, that damage actually will degenerate into some form of disease expression over time. And we don't want that, of course. In the name of healthcare, we want to prevent disease. We want to cure the roots of disease. So yeah, and I'm being really definitive about this. Yeah, you obviously you can't get back the person that was lost. That, as I say, that's life. However, we have a really important health aspect to take care of, as I just said, is you don't want that um, that to become a long-term piece of damage that now will become a chronic disease that person will just keep getting worse and worse over time. So this is a very important part about that second jurisdiction is we differentiate it from imbalance because that's not what it is. And we also differentiate the treatment principles. So where in the first jurisdiction, we were using the law of opposites. As the example I gave, that child eating all the oranges, they had a deficit of vitamin C, so they were just reaching for more vitamin C. They were giving more of it. So if somebody has too little, they take more. If they have too much, they take less. Very, pretty simple. It's just like basic arithmetic. But yeah, now we're in a totally different world in the second jurisdiction. So we're not in balance. We're dealing with disease, and as I just gave the example, we apply the curative principle, which is the law of similars. So now you can actually repair the damage, you know, you move forward in a full state of health. But as I say, not to forget the person that you lost or anything of the sort. But yeah, just to kind of be, kind of remain a whole, healthy human being that can fully function. So I'll give you one other, this is popping to my mind, another example of the law of similars. I gave this emotional example, a loss or a grief. It's a very, very common thing. We all go through it, as I said. Let's take a more physical example. Let's take, some type of toxicity. Let's say somebody's had, in some circumstance, they had, let's say, mercury exposure, or maybe aluminum exposure, some kind of environmental toxin, or even some kind of kind of self-induced toxin, as far as taking a drug overdose or something like that. Well, here we're still using the law of similars to cure the damage that's done by such an event, but it's kind of in terms of the homeopathic remedies, we can actually use the homeopathic remedy, the medicine made from whatever that toxin was. We have homeopathic mercury, we have homeopathic aluminum, we have all the different toxins in homeopathic form, and now it's quite a direct analogy through the law of similars. We're giving kind of a safe form of that toxin, aluminum or whatever, based on the law of similars, and it actually creates a curative effect, and it repairs whatever damage was done by that toxic exposure. So that, as I say, that's a very clear physical example. And to bring it now back to our first example of the grief, obviously we can't turn grief into a homeopathic remedy. Like whereas the grief in the world, like you can't pull a grief fruit off of a grief tree and turn that into a homeopathic remedy. Like, yeah, we can get aluminum in a physical form, but what do you do with something intangible like an emotion? Well, we use more of an analog here, where we have certain substances in the world. In the case of grief, the classic homeopathic remedy is natrium muriaticum, and when you turn that's sodium chloride, or that's a form of salt. And the reason that's our the closely direct similar remedy for grief is the whole physiology of the different salts, especially this one, the sodium chloride, really closely mirrors the whole physiology of grief. Like in the emotion of grief, we become very contractive. We're sad, of course, but we pull away. We pull away from the positive things in life and the flow of life, and we're kind of going into our own pain and our own hurting and all of that. So that's the physiology of grief, and that's actually directly mirrored in that sodium chloride, that natrium muriaticum remedy I mentioned. So that's where the law of similars is kind of working in another at another level. That we don't have the direct aluminum to take from the aluminum mine and turn that into a remedy. No, that's not an option. But we can still use the law of similars. So I'm just kind of giving a bit more of a kind of the framework around the second jurisdiction and around the law of similars here. And I hope that's kind of filling in some of the gaps for you, Jen. But please tell me, yeah, if I'm kind of adding any more confusion or kind of opening up more questions here. And speaking of questions, we're also talking about something very practical, the location of our clinic. Well, basically these days we're 100% a telemedicine clinic. So our location is essentially the internet. Like some people do that on their social media profiles when where they have to fill in their name and their location. They just write the internet for location. They're trying to be cute, rather than write a country name or something. But yeah, obviously we're here in a certain physical space, Allison and I. But yeah, our practice is the location of the whole world of the internet, which is pretty much just about anywhere, basically. So that's kind of the practical question you're asking. But yeah, please do tell me where that lands for you. Everything. So Jen, please tell me where that lands for you. What I was saying about the disease, the second jurisdiction, the law of similars, and if that opens further questions for you, or if there's kind of another aspect of that you have more curiosity about. But as I say, I hope I kind of gave more form and clarity there, but I'll wait to see how it lands for you.
Hello, Dr. Quarantere. I'd like to return to the topic of therapeutic regimen, referring to balance, and hopefully I won't have a light fall while we're talking. Thank you again for your time in discussing these topics with me and my audience today. So, the first jurisdiction, as you were saying, talks about balance and all the different areas of our life that we need to keep in balance. And I recall this one particular time that my work life balance was out of sorts. And it was amazing how much stress that created in my life. And that was around the time, as I mentioned before, that I started using the homeopathic rescue remedies. And that helped me, especially during the interim, until I was able to adjust my work position to something that worked well with everything else that was in my life. And it's when you're out of balance in a certain area, I think it feels a little bit like spinning plates, and you feel like you're just barely holding all the areas up. And it definitely feels much better when the different areas of our lives are more in balance. Um, I am really curious to know more about some of the different remedies. I've used maybe 5 to 7 different remedies over the years, and I'd like to learn more about the different homeopathic remedies. And I think you had mentioned this before, that remedies help us to perform in an optimal way, that they treat disease or emotional shock, and they repair damage and cure the root of the disease and keep the damage from developing into disease. And so you can repair the damage and move forward and help us stay in tune with our instinctual wisdom. And then I'd like to move on to another topic. I would love if you could describe more about mapping. I don't really have an understanding of exactly what that looks like. and how it's used, how it benefits different people. And I'd love to hear maybe like a positive result that you have seen from it. Um, and then I do have a further question. If you could share with my audience a little more about the law of similars in respect to vaccines, and maybe touch on homeopathic vaccines. I've heard of those a number of times over the years, and I'd really like to know more about that. And I'm sure my audience would be very interested in learning more about that as well. I have learned a ton through this discussion, and I look forward to your response. Thank you again, and my audience and I look forward to hearing back from you.
Hi, Jen. So thank you for that. You're sort of asking a range of some different topics, which is fine. And I was I was trying to figure out how I was going to tackle, like all the different topics. I don't want to just give a 6-hour lecture to cover everything, but I want to take your question seriously. And I think maybe the most useful thing, if I start with your last question about vaccines and homeopathic vaccines, I think from there I can kind of expand into from there the vaccines into your other topics. I think it's kind of a good central point, and we'll see if my experiment works here. But yeah, I have a feeling that's the best way to do it. So yeah, the general topic of vaccination. Well, it's a vast topic. This is not going to give all the answers to everything about vaccines and homeopathic vaccines. That's a very comprehensive topic. But let's touch on some basic points here. So one of the most, as you already know, we've been talking, the most basic principles, especially in the second jurisdiction, is the law of similars. You brought this up in some of your recent questions. The law of similars is it's a general truth, a general law of nature, but it has many different dimensions of application, right? So, well, there's many things in life like that. There's a general principle, but then it kind of has to be applied in many different individual contexts, right? The same principle, but it looks different. It's not different. It's just it has to be kind of implemented kind of at different levels. So same with the law of similars. We have this law of cure, but of course that we can flip that around when we go into the realm of vaccination, or immunization is kind of a better word for for a lot of how we do the homeopathic version. The What I mean by going the other direction is that you normally we're using the law of similars to cure an existing disease, to cure a damage, as we've been talking about. We get a damage to our emotional body or our life force, what have you, and now we come along afterwards to repair that with the law of similars. There's the like cures like. I think I've given some examples in some of our previous videos. We give a specific homeopathic remedy, which now repairs that trauma or that emotional body damage, whatever it was, so that it doesn't fester as a long-term chronic disease. So that's the curative side. But what I'm talking about in terms of immunization, by coming from the other side, meaning you can still use the law of similars before there's even a disease to prevent it. So both prevention, ahead of time, cure after the fact. These are coming from two directions of time, but they both can be applied on the law of similars, the like cures like. So as far as the homeopathic approach, now of course we know the mainstream medical approach to vaccination is it's an injection of whatever that particular microbe is, the disease agent, measles or chickenpox or the flu or whatever. All these different vaccines, they're based on kind of a modified version of whatever that disease agent is, the bacteria, the virus, all these different germs, as it were, as we say in common language. Those are kind of the base of the vaccine, and then that gets injected into the human patient or animal patient. Animals are vaccinated too, and that causes an immune response. This is the theory of it, which then kind of protects the person from any future exposure to that disease in nature, right? So we kind of give this artificial medical form of a disease, um, ahead of time to theoretically prevent the person from getting exposed to that nature. And the basic idea is correct. Now, in practice, there's a lot of problems with vaccination, but the basic idea is correct that it's kind of like, just think of like in general, real life in general, we have certain experiences, even certain stressors or difficult times of life, but we don't like stress, of course. However, it kind of prepares us for when we get into a similar or worse kind of stress later in life. It's kind of like, a little bit, let's say, like martial arts or military training, exercises to prepare the soldier for all the harsh conditions of war. It's kind of like, yeah, it's better to go through that kind of in a pretend way. Like, yeah, we're going to pretend we're firing bullets at each other. Like, these are your fellow soldiers. They all do training together before they get sent to the front, and they're kind of preparing for the kinds of situations they might be facing in real life. So that's kind of the very basic idea of vaccination. We're preparing our immune system in, a semi supposedly friendly way to prepare for when we actually hit the danger out in the world, because you never know when it's gonna be attacking you, right? It could be any time. But so, anyways, that's the basic idea of the mainstream vaccination. The homeopathic approach kind of takes the same idea, but we basically solve all the problems of the mainstream vaccination, right? We solve the problems of the safe, the issues of safety, the issues of efficacy, and as I said, this is a huge topic. I'm just giving these headlines here because it would take hours to go through all of this. But yeah, we're kind of doing it in a much safer and effective way, but we're getting the desired result. We're getting that immune system to be trained, like a soldier trained for war. But now when we meet whatever that germ is in real life, we already know what to do. So anyway, that's just a very basic idea of homeopathic immunization. But why I started there, because it also gives us a doorway into some of your other questions. The one of your general questions about the law of similars. You asked something about what are some of the different remedies. Well, in a sense, I've already given one example here. We have the homeopathic remedies, which stand as immunization. Like our version of the vaccinations, and these are made, same idea. They're made from the actual disease material, whether that's measles or whatever it is, into a homeopathic form. So that's one category of remedies. Whether it's an actual disease agent, whether it's a certain toxin. People can be exposed to different toxins in the world. Heavy metals and other, well, man-made things, certain, a lot of the modern industrial processes kind of have a lot of toxic byproducts. So, all these kinds of things we have in homeopathic forms, just like, we can have a homeopathic remedy for immunization made of something, that's disease causing or something that's toxic. And that in very general terms, that's one category. So that also takes us into another one of your questions, which is about the timeline therapy, where we go through somebody's life history of shocks and traumas and toxins, emotional conflicts, all the different kinds of big life challenges we go through, challenges to our immune system, challenges to our emotional body, and everything in between. And this is what we do in the timeline therapy part of the Heilkunst treatment, is we go through all of that history in reverse chronological order. So whatever the most recent shock or trauma was in somebody's life will be the first thing that we treat on the timeline, and then we progressively go all the way back till their birth. So reverse chronological order, but we've already started with some examples here. Let's say somebody, let's say, had a situation of being vaccine damaged, from one or another vaccine they had. This will be part of their timeline treatment. Now we will go back in time, and we will use the equivalent homeopathic remedy to now reverse whatever that shock or damage was in their system. And that's the whole timeline treatment. We do that one after another for all the different kinds of events. So we have toxins and medical shocks, like I'm talking about, the vaccines. We also have emotional shocks, and we have equivalent homeopathic remedies for those. And we have just other, just general life processes. Let's say somebody, this is something common. I'm just pulling this, out of the air. Just many women who are going through menopause, and some of the challenges they go through with that. We can use homeopathic remedies as far as the different hormonal functions, the different glandular functions, which kind of regulate the hormones. We kind of work up and down the scale there. But that's another example. You get into kind of not so much a toxin or a vaccine or something like that, but just an innate physiological process that we work on also through that kind of timeline approach. And then, as I've already been mentioning, another main category of homeopathic remedies, and I mentioned this a moment ago, is all the different emotional shocks or traumas. People go through major life crises, and losing a job and losing a spouse, and and on and on and on. There's lots of emotional trauma in our world, for all kinds of reasons. That's life in one sense, but there's a lot of stress and challenge. So as far as the timeline goes, we will use the matching emotional form of that homeopathic remedy, which can remove the damaging aspects of that and help the person to to be able to kind of go forward in a more natural, healthy way through their life without carrying the burden of whatever kind of damage that they had sustained, and will threaten to stay in the system if we don't intervene properly. So that's, as I said, I'm just talking in general about the timeline therapy. And I think, as I say, we started with the immunizations and the vaccinations, and that took us back in the timeline, and likewise that also gave us just a general sense of some of the different categories of homeopathic remedies. Of course, we can go into more and more detail, but yeah, why don't we say, I think we've kind of covered a good range of questions, and we've kind of gone into some really interesting areas. So yeah, why don't we kind of close off this video here. I'll thank you again. I didn't, as always with anyone I have a conversation with, I kind of get a new version of questions. Everyone has their own way of thinking about things and their own way of questioning. So I do appreciate that, and I did enjoy this. And yeah, we will go on to further topics in future videos. But as I say, I think this has been quite helpful as it is. And yeah, we will see you in our next